The flight was running smoothly, passengers settling comfortably into their seats, the gentle murmur of conversations blending into the familiar hum of a cabin preparing for departure. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon that held no sign of trouble, no indication that one seemingly minor moment would soon change everything. Evelyn Harper stepped carefully onto the aircraft, her movements measured and deliberate, each step taken with quiet assurance. She was an elderly woman, her silver-gray hair neatly pinned back, accentuating the gentle elegance of her face. Her simple beige coat and carefully chosen pearl earrings spoke volumes about her understated sophistication, while her calm eyes radiated a quiet power, a power she never needed to announce. As Evelyn moved down the aisle toward the business class section, her gaze swept gently across the passengers already seated, offering small, courteous nods to those who met her eyes. There was nothing rushed about her demeanor, nothing anxious or hurried. Instead, she moved with a grace and composure that seemed to carry with it decades of wisdom, experience, and confidence. Passengers nearby glanced up briefly, then returned to their phones, magazines, or quiet conversations, unaware of who she was, unaware that the woman quietly passing by their seats was far more than just another traveler. Evelyn Harper was not someone accustomed to making her presence loudly known, though she easily could have. She preferred to observe quietly, to let others reveal themselves in their own time. When Evelyn reached her assigned seat, she gently placed her small leather purse on the armrest and carefully lowered herself into the plush seat. With a soft sigh, she settled comfortably, savoring the brief moment of calm before takeoff. Outside her window, airport crew members moved purposefully across the tarmac, and in the distance, the late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the sky. Beside her seat lay the standard airplane seatbelt, the metal buckle resting just slightly out of reach. Evelyn extended her hand toward it, her slender fingers gently grasping for the fabric, but it slipped through her grasp. She exhaled softly, patiently trying again, her movements still steady but less sure than they had once been. Time had begun to gently erode her physical certainty, though it had never touched her inner strength. After another attempt proved unsuccessful, Evelyn paused, glancing up the aisle, scanning for assistance. It was a simple request, one that required no significant effort, just a moment of kindness from another person. Her gaze settled upon a flight attendant standing just a few rows ahead in the first-class section. Sabrina Holloway stood tall and elegant, her posture perfectly straight, her uniform impeccable down to every polished button. Her golden blonde hair was pulled neatly into a flawless bun, and her polished appearance was matched only by the confident, slightly arrogant way she interacted with the first-class passengers. She laughed softly at a joke told by a well-dressed businessman, her smile dazzling but reserved exclusively for those she deemed important enough to deserve her best service. Evelyn hesitated briefly, her eyes lingering on Sabrina. She was a seasoned observer of human behavior, and she recognized that particular air, the subtle but unmistakable arrogance, the quiet superiority of someone used to being admired, someone who enjoyed holding the power of attention. But Evelyn had learned long ago not to judge too quickly, to offer the benefit of the doubt, even when instinct whispered caution. After a moment's consideration, Evelyn gently cleared her throat and spoke softly, politely, careful not to interrupt too abruptly. "Excuse me, dear," she called, her voice calm and kind. "Would you mind helping me for a moment?" Sabrina's head turned slowly, the polite smile she wore faltering ever so slightly when she saw who had spoken. It was subtle, a tightening at the corners of her mouth, a flicker of mild irritation quickly hidden behind practiced courtesy. Her gaze moved briefly to the unbuckled seatbelt in Evelyn's hand, and for an instant, impatience flashed clearly through her blue eyes. "It's just a seatbelt, ma'am," Sabrina responded with forced patience, her tone just barely masking a condescending edge. "You simply pull it across and click it in place." Evelyn gave a slight nod, the expression on her face never changing from its calm, dignified neutrality. She had encountered people like Sabrina countless times in her life, people who judged quickly, who saw age as weakness and politeness as permission to dismiss. "I tried, dear," Evelyn replied evenly, gently acknowledging the slight tremor in her hand with a graceful gesture. "But my hands aren't as steady as they once were. Could you spare just a second?" Sabrina's jaw tightened slightly, her eyes scanning quickly across the nearby passengers, ensuring no one of particular importance was observing the interaction. With a barely audible sigh, she responded curtly, "I'll be back in a moment," Sabrina muttered dismissively, already turning away to rejoin the conversation she deemed far more deserving of her attention. She quickly resumed chatting with the passengers in first class, the incident already dismissed from her mind as if Evelyn and her small request had never existed. Unnoticed by Sabrina, Lucas Bennett, a young man in his early 30s seated next to Evelyn, had been carefully observing the entire exchange. He was casually dressed in a dark sweater, his intelligent eyes keenly taking in the subtle interplay of pride and prejudice unfolding before him. Lucas glanced at Evelyn, noting the calm dignity that never wavered, the quiet strength hidden beneath the surface of her polite demeanor. "Allow me," Lucas said softly, leaning over slightly and gently reaching across to assist. With a quick, easy click, he fastened the seatbelt for her. Evelyn turned toward him, offering a gentle, grateful smile that conveyed more than just simple thanks. "Thank you, son," she said softly, her voice carrying warmth and genuine appreciation. Lucas nodded in return, though discomfort flickered briefly across his face. He had witnessed something distasteful, a small but telling moment of arrogance, and though he didn't yet fully understand its implications, he sensed that this would not be the last they heard of Sabrina's careless dismissal. Nearby passengers quietly exchanged glances. Some had noticed Sabrina's attitude, others had chosen to ignore it, unwilling or uninterested in involving themselves in a conflict. Yet no one spoke openly, content for now to simply observe and remain detached. What none of them realized, however, was that Evelyn Harper wasn't simply an ordinary passenger. Far from it. She held a quiet, invisible authority they had yet to comprehend, one that could alter the course of events far beyond a simple interaction aboard an airplane. Evelyn settled back into her seat, her calm eyes gazing thoughtfully out the window, quietly reflecting upon the brief exchange. The plane's engines hummed steadily as it began its careful taxi toward the runway, passengers unaware that everything was already set in motion. Because Sabrina Holloway had just made a mistake, one she could never have imagined would have consequences reaching far beyond this seemingly ordinary flight. The plane rolled smoothly toward the runway, the familiar hum of the engines gently vibrating beneath the cabin floor as passengers adjusted their belongings, settled into their seats and prepared for takeoff. Evelyn Harper remained quietly composed, her hands resting gently on her lap. The brief encounter with Sabrina Holloway lingered subtly in her mind, not because it upset her deeply, but because it quietly revealed something important. As Evelyn gazed thoughtfully out the window, Sabrina moved gracefully down the aisle, her polished shoes clicking softly against the aircraft floor. She paused briefly at each first-class passenger, her voice melodic, her smile impeccably bright, providing meticulous attention to those she believed were deserving. Her golden blonde hair caught the soft interior cabin lights, giving her the appearance of someone who always stood at the center of attention, someone accustomed to admiration, authority, and privilege. Yet when she reached Evelyn's row again, Sabrina's demeanor changed noticeably. Her previously radiant smile dimmed slightly, her eyes coolly scanning across the row as if Evelyn's presence were invisible, irrelevant, or simply beneath her notice. Evelyn watched silently, noting how Sabrina carefully avoided even the briefest eye contact with her, her expression communicating a quiet disdain she didn't attempt to conceal. Sabrina had already dismissed Evelyn as unimportant, her prior request forgotten as quickly as it had been ignored. Feeling the seatbelt slightly uncomfortable, Evelyn reached down to adjust it, her fingers slipping slightly as the buckle twisted awkwardly. She gently attempted to correct it once more, but found that it resisted her careful movements, stubbornly refusing to cooperate. The buckle seemed tangled in an awkward position, just beyond the easy reach of her increasingly unsteady hands. Sabrina, still standing nearby attending to a first-class passenger's needs, appeared calm and relaxed, openly conversing with a businessman who spoke confidently and smiled broadly. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her natural politeness making her reluctant to interrupt. Yet her genuine need compelled her to try again. "Excuse me." Evelyn spoke softly once more, her voice calm and carefully neutral, her eyes patiently seeking Sabrina's attention. "I'm terribly sorry, but I still seem to have some difficulty with this seatbelt. Would you mind?" Sabrina paused briefly mid-conversation, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features as she reluctantly turned her head. Her practiced smile tightened slightly at the edges, irritation plainly visible beneath its carefully maintained facade. "Ma'am," Sabrina responded coolly, her voice low enough not to disturb her preferred passengers, yet sharp enough to clearly convey her irritation. "It's only a seat belt. I'm sure you're more than capable of managing it yourself, aren't you?" The question was posed with feigned politeness, but the implication was unmistakable. Evelyn felt the weight of the subtle insult, yet her expression remained remarkably unchanged, her eyes calmly meeting Sabrina's gaze without wavering. She offered no immediate reply, allowing the silence to stretch between them for just a moment longer, her quiet dignity filling the empty space. "I certainly try, my dear," Evelyn finally replied, gently, carefully choosing each word, her voice maintaining its soft, measured tone. "But sometimes, age doesn't permit the independence we'd prefer." Sabrina sighed audibly, clearly frustrated at being interrupted and compelled to deal with what she considered a trivial inconvenience. She glanced briefly toward her first-class passengers, assuring herself they had not observed this minor confrontation, before returning her icy gaze back to Evelyn. "As I said," Sabrina repeated coldly, almost under her breath, "it's a seatbelt. You simply pull it across and click it into place. I'm certain you'll manage." Without waiting for a response, Sabrina turned sharply away, her movements brisk and decisive, pointedly indicating that she had already wasted enough of her valuable time. Evelyn watched her go, still composed, though a flicker of something deeper passed quietly behind her calm eyes. Perhaps disappointment, perhaps a quiet sadness at a lack of basic human kindness. Lucas Bennett had been silently observing the exchange from his seat beside Evelyn. His dark eyes narrowed, a quiet anger simmering beneath his typically reserved exterior. He had watched Sabrina's dismissive attitude with growing irritation, increasingly aware of the stark contrast in how she treated Evelyn compared to the first-class passengers. It was clear Sabrina had made assumptions about Evelyn based solely on her age and appearance, assumptions that Lucas found deeply offensive. Without hesitation, Lucas leaned gently across the armrest, his voice soft but firm, respectful but undeniably purposeful. "Allow me, please," he offered quietly, his tone warm and considerate as he carefully reached toward Evelyn's seatbelt. With practiced ease, he swiftly untangled the buckle, adjusting the fabric until it comfortably secured around her. The entire gesture took only a brief moment, yet it carried profound significance. Evelyn looked warmly at Lucas, her eyes shining softly with gratitude. "Thank you so much," she said quietly, her voice rich with sincerity, carrying more than just gratitude for his practical assistance. It was also appreciation for the quiet integrity he displayed, a quality Sabrina seemed so conspicuously to lack. Lucas nodded slightly, offering a faint, comforting smile in return, though his eyes still held a touch of lingering irritation as he glanced up toward the aisle. Sabrina was once again comfortably attending to the well-dressed passengers up front, her bright laughter drifting faintly back through the cabin. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly. The contrast between her polished charm and her disdainful disregard for Evelyn felt deeply unjust, unfair, and, above all, completely unnecessary. Nearby, other passengers quietly exchanged glances, some clearly aware of Sabrina's dismissive behavior, but reluctant to voice any open criticism. Olivia Harrington turned quietly to her husband, Richard, speaking softly so that only he could hear. "Did you see how rude she was to that woman?" Olivia whispered indignantly, her eyes discreetly indicating Evelyn. "That's disgraceful." Richard nodded thoughtfully, lowering his voice carefully. "It's unfortunate, but sadly not uncommon. People often judge too quickly based on appearance alone." Yet even as quiet conversations unfolded among passengers, Sabrina remained oblivious. She had already mentally categorized Evelyn Harper as insignificant, a minor inconvenience forgotten as soon as possible. It was a mistake she could not yet comprehend, a misjudgment that would carry deeper consequences than she could imagine. As the aircraft began to accelerate down the runway, Evelyn rested her hand softly against the seat, calmly reflecting upon Sabrina's behavior. She had witnessed such attitudes many times throughout her long career, seen the subtle arrogance of those who believed power came solely from wealth, appearance, or position. But Evelyn had learned a different lesson, one that Sabrina had yet to discover. As the plane lifted gently into the sky, Evelyn glanced calmly out at the fading landscape below, a small, thoughtful smile briefly crossing her lips. Sabrina had unknowingly revealed much about herself in a single, careless interaction. Now, the quiet elegance and understated power Evelyn carried had taken note. She would remain patient, composed, and quietly observant as always, understanding better than most that true character always revealed itself in moments others considered unimportant. Little did Sabrina Holloway realize that her dismissive arrogance had just set events into motion. Events she could not possibly foresee, but which would soon test everything she thought she knew about power, respect, and human dignity. As the plane smoothly climbed to cruising altitude, a gentle chime echoed through the cabin, signaling that passengers could now relax comfortably in their seats. Evelyn Harper gazed out her window quietly, observing clouds drifting lazily below, a serene backdrop contrasting sharply with the subtle tension now humming through the cabin. Sabrina Holloway continued her rounds through the first-class section, her demeanor shifting effortlessly back to one of warmth, grace, and charm. She leaned gently toward a wealthy passenger, smiling brightly as she refilled his champagne glass, carefully angling the bottle so not a single drop spilled. Her eyes sparkled with professional ease, her laughter melodic, her posture attentive yet elegant. Here, among those she deemed important, Sabrina was every inch the perfect flight attendant. Attentive, kind, gracious, and utterly charming. Yet, when she moved past Evelyn's row again, Sabrina's carefully cultivated warmth disappeared as abruptly as if it had never existed. Her eyes turned cool and distant, her expression blank and disinterested. She strode briskly past, intentionally refusing to even glance toward Evelyn, deliberately and publicly dismissing her once again. It was an action meant to subtly but unmistakably convey disrespect, a silent declaration that Evelyn was simply not worthy of her attention or courtesy. Evelyn herself, though calm and composed as always, felt the sting of this small but pointed humiliation. Her expression never changed, yet deep within her gaze, a quiet acknowledgement of Sabrina's character was becoming clearer by the moment. Nearby, Olivia and Richard Harrington watched closely from their seats. Olivia's eyebrows furrowed in quiet indignation as she observed Sabrina's blatant disregard. She leaned gently toward her husband, speaking in a low, urgent whisper, careful not to draw unnecessary attention from other passengers. "Richard?" Olivia said softly, her voice edged with irritation. "Did you just see that? That flight attendant, Sabrina. She completely ignored that poor woman again. It's absolutely shameful. Richard nodded solemnly, his usually calm demeanor replaced by quiet concern. He glanced quickly toward Evelyn, noticing her dignified silence, the calm strength in her eyes as she sat gracefully, offering no outward sign of offense. "I noticed, Olivia," Richard murmured quietly, a hint of anger slipping into his usually composed tone. "But it seems no one else is stepping in. It's as though they think it's normal to treat someone that way." Olivia shook her head slightly, clearly troubled. "It's heartbreaking. Imagine how humiliating it must feel. To be treated as if you're invisible just because you're not dressed in designer clothes or wearing expensive jewelry." Their quiet conversation drew the attention of Rachel Dawson, a younger flight attendant who stood unobtrusively near the galley. Rachel was a slender woman in her late 20s, her dark hair pulled neatly into a simple ponytail. Unlike Sabrina, Rachel's eyes held warmth and genuine kindness. She had been observing Sabrina's interactions with Evelyn since the beginning of the flight, and something about Sabrina's dismissive behavior deeply unsettled her. Rachel watched Evelyn quietly, seeing the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. Noticing the gentle smile Evelyn still managed to offer Lucas Bennett, who continued to quietly support and reassure her with small, comforting gestures. Rachel knew Evelyn deserved better, and her conscience wouldn't allow her to simply watch without intervening. Steeling herself, Rachel approached Sabrina discreetly as she stood alone in the galley, adjusting items on a tray. Rachel cleared her throat softly, careful to remain respectful despite the unease rising within her. "Sabrina," Rachel began cautiously, choosing her words carefully. "I don't mean to interfere, but perhaps you might consider offering a bit more assistance to the lady in seat 7B. She seems like she could use a little extra attention." Sabrina's hands paused mid-action, her back stiffening visibly at Rachel's quiet suggestion. She turned slowly to face Rachel, her eyes narrowing slightly, her expression suddenly cold. "Excuse me?" Sabrina replied, her voice edged with subtle hostility, the tone deliberately implying Rachel had overstepped her place. "Are you telling me how to do my job now, Rachel?" Rachel hesitated briefly but held her ground, meeting Sabrina's irritated stare with steady determination. "No, of course not," Rachel responded carefully, trying to remain calm and composed despite Sabrina's obvious attempt at intimidation. "But the passenger clearly needed help. I just thought—" Sabrina cut her off sharply, her voice low but intensely biting. "I'm fully aware of how to perform my job. Maybe you should spend more time worrying about your own responsibilities and less about mine." The words were delivered softly enough to avoid passenger attention, yet harsh enough to leave no doubt about Sabrina's meaning. Rachel felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, aware that Sabrina had purposely attempted to belittle her, to remind her of her place. "I'm sorry," Rachel responded softly, stepping back slightly, knowing that further confrontation would only escalate the situation. Sabrina turned away from Rachel dismissively, returning her attention to the tray before her, clearly signaling that the conversation was over. Rachel withdrew quietly, her frustration evident as she moved discreetly back to her post. She cast a quick glance toward Evelyn, wishing she could do more, troubled deeply by the unfairness she had just witnessed. Meanwhile, Lucas Bennett had quietly observed Sabrina's repeated slights, his irritation gradually turning into quiet anger. He glanced discreetly at Evelyn, noting once more her composed expression, her graceful acceptance of Sabrina's disrespect. He felt compelled to speak but held back, not wanting to embarrass Evelyn further. But the growing tension was becoming noticeable even to passengers who had initially paid no attention. Murmurs and discreet glances began to pass between seats, the subtle sense of discomfort spreading slowly through the cabin. Sabrina, however, remained utterly oblivious, continuing to lavish her charm upon the first-class passengers as if nothing were amiss. Evelyn, quietly attentive, had noted every detail. The disrespectful treatment from Sabrina, the subtle whispers of support from passengers like Olivia and Richard Harrington, the brave but unsuccessful intervention of Rachel Dawson. All these small moments quietly revealed a great deal. She knew better than most that true character was not measured by how one treated those of perceived power or importance, but rather how one chose to behave when they thought no one important was watching. Sabrina Holloway had clearly demonstrated the measure of her character. As the plane glided steadily onward through calm skies, Evelyn maintained her quiet, thoughtful composure. She understood something Sabrina clearly did not: that real authority rarely needed to assert itself loudly. Real authority was quiet, understated, and revealed itself in moments that truly mattered. And what Sabrina Holloway had yet to understand, Evelyn knew with quiet certainty. She was about to learn a lesson in respect. A lesson Evelyn Harper was quietly but decisively prepared to teach. The gentle hum of engines filled the cabin as the aircraft soared smoothly at cruising altitude. Passengers relaxed comfortably in their seats, some quietly reading, others drifting into restful naps, completely unaware that something deeply unsettling was quietly brewing beneath the calm surface. Evelyn Harper remained seated gracefully in her business-class seat, gazing serenely out the window, while beside her, Lucas Bennett subtly kept watchful eyes on the unfolding situation. Meanwhile, at the front of the aircraft, seated discreetly in first class, Alexander Sinclair carefully observed every detail of Sabrina Holloway's behavior, noting each calculated glance, each slight sneer, each moment she chose to lavish attention on the wealthy passengers, completely ignoring those she had silently decided weren't worth her time. Sinclair was a man who thrived on subtlety. He rarely involved himself directly unless it truly mattered, and today, it mattered deeply. He had watched carefully as Sabrina casually dismissed Evelyn Harper multiple times, deliberately embarrassing her without so much as a second thought. Each small action quietly built his anger, until finally Sinclair had seen enough. Without a word, he retrieved his phone from his tailored jacket pocket, his movements precise and deliberate, typing out a brief, damning message directly to the airline's senior executives, laying out clearly exactly what he had witnessed. The message was concise, leaving no doubt as to the seriousness of the incident. Sinclair tapped the send button calmly, returning his phone to his pocket, his expression unchanged. Knowing exactly the impact his words would have, the wheels were now turning rapidly, and soon Sabrina would have nowhere left to hide. Inside the cockpit, Marcus Sheridan, the flight supervisor, stood by the radio panel, listening intently to the incoming message from the airline's senior executives. His eyes widened in shock as he processed the gravity of what he was being told. His face suddenly pale. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked sharply, voice tight with disbelief. Evelyn Harper herself? On this flight? And no one informed the crew beforehand? The voice on the other end was firm, unwavering. "Yes, Marcus. Alexander Sinclair just reported that Ms. Harper, the Evelyn Harper, the founder and owner of this airline, is seated quietly in business class, seat 7B, and one of your senior attendants, Sabrina Holloway, publicly refused to assist her." Marcus felt his stomach twist painfully. Evelyn Harper, the Evelyn Harper, legendary founder and chairwoman of the airline, had been quietly humiliated on one of her own flights, and he had allowed it to happen without even knowing. He clenched the radio handset, forcing his voice to remain steady, though it was nearly impossible. "I understand. I'll handle this immediately," Marcus responded, ending the call with hands trembling slightly. He exchanged a look of dread with Ryan Fletcher, the communications officer beside him, before turning toward Captain Gregory Shaw, who sat quietly at the controls. "What's wrong?" Captain Shaw asked cautiously, sensing the tension radiating from Marcus. "Captain," "We have a very serious issue," Marcus began slowly, carefully choosing his words. "A VIP. Actually, the VIP is sitting in business class right now, and she's been openly disrespected by one of our senior crew." Captain Shaw's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. "Who?" Marcus hesitated only a moment before speaking clearly. "Evelyn Harper." Captain Shaw stared blankly at him, stunned into silence for several long seconds before shaking his head slowly. "And none of us were informed?" "No," Marcus responded grimly. "Worse, one of our senior attendants publicly ignored and humiliated her. It's already been reported directly to corporate by Alexander Sinclair. They've ordered an immediate review upon landing." A heavy silence settled over the cockpit, punctuated only by the steady drone of the engines. Captain Shaw's expression hardened. "Who's the attendant responsible for this?" Marcus exhaled slowly, a cold dread settling over him as he checked the passenger manifest once more, though he already knew the answer. "Sabrina Holloway," he replied. Captain Shaw shook his head slowly, frustration clear on his face. How could she be so careless? Marcus didn't reply, instead reaching for the intercom, his finger hesitating just a moment over the button. Then, with a deep breath, he activated the system and spoke, his voice carrying clearly but firmly into the crew's private communication channel. "Sabrina Holloway, report to the galley immediately." In the cabin, Sabrina paused mid-sentence, the cheerful smile dropping instantly from her face, replaced by quiet confusion. Her heart skipped, uncertainty flickering across her carefully composed features. She had been summoned before, but something in Marcus's voice sent a chill through her. With a quick apology to the passenger she was entertaining, she straightened and began walking toward the galley. Her polished shoes clicked sharply against the cabin floor, the rhythm rapid, tense. She entered the galley and found Marcus Sheridan standing rigidly, his face carefully blank, but his eyes icy. "You called for me?" Sabrina asked cautiously, trying to keep her voice steady, her usual confidence faltering. Marcus didn't waste time. "Do you have any idea who is sitting in 7B? She frowned slightly, confused by his directness. "Seat 7B? The elderly woman?" Marcus narrowed his eyes, voice cold and heavy with suppressed anger. "That elderly woman, as you call her, is Evelyn Harper, the founder and owner of this airline. She is the reason you and all of us have our jobs." The silence that followed was deafening. Sabrina's face drained of color, her lips parting in shock, eyes wide and stunned as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her breath hitched in her chest, and her hands involuntarily curled into fists at her sides. "No," Sabrina stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That can't be right." "It's absolutely correct," Marcus replied curtly, "and Alexander Sinclair, one of the airline's largest stakeholders, just reported directly to corporate exactly how you've treated her." Sabrina's pulse raced, panic clawing at her chest. She struggled to find words, her usually composed demeanor shattering under the weight of this realization. I didn't save it," Marcus cut her off harshly. "You'll have to explain yourself to the executives once we land. You need to fix this immediately. Offer Mrs. Harper a sincere apology. Now." "But," Sabrina began desperately. "No excuses," Marcus snapped, cutting her off again. "No attitude. You have one chance to make this right, though, honestly, I doubt it will matter at this point." Sabrina's hands trembled, and she swallowed the lump in her throat. The confidence she had built her entire career upon evaporated in seconds, replaced by a sickening fear. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice to a steely whisper. "When we land, you're going to answer for this. And trust me, Sabrina, no amount of charm or excuses will fix what you've done." He stepped aside, leaving Sabrina standing alone in the galley. For a long, painful moment, she stared blankly ahead, feeling the walls close in around her. All her calculated charm, all the confidence and arrogance she had carefully nurtured, crumbled away, leaving only dread and regret. Outside the galley, passengers felt the tension thickening, whispered conversations springing up as they sensed something significant had occurred. Olivia and Richard Harrington exchanged glances, knowing something serious had unfolded. Rachel Dawson discreetly observed Sabrina from afar, saddened but unsurprised. And Evelyn Harper, quiet, composed, dignified, simply continued gazing calmly out the window, quietly understanding that justice was about to be served without her needing to lift a single finger. Because Evelyn knew something Sabrina was only now learning. True power never needed to announce itself loudly. Real authority didn't demand attention, it commanded respect, quietly, inevitably, and without mercy for those who chose to dismiss it. Sabrina Holloway was about to discover just how severe those consequences could be. Sabrina Holloway stood frozen in the galley, her chest tight with panic, pulse racing wildly beneath her composed exterior. This was a nightmare she had never envisioned. A single careless choice spiraling into a moment that could destroy everything she'd worked for. Taking a deep breath, she forced her trembling hands to still and straightened her shoulders, desperately grasping at the fragments of her dignity. She knew what she had to do, apologize, sincerely, if only to save herself from further humiliation. Yet, as she began her slow, heavy-footed walk back toward seat 7B, every step felt like walking toward judgment. As Sabrina approached Evelyn Harper, her heart hammered loudly in her chest, a noise deafening in the eerie quiet that had descended upon the cabin. Passengers suddenly turned to watch her, whispers falling silent as eyes tracked her every hesitant step. Sabrina felt their scrutiny, the sharp edges of judgment pressing against her skin. She stopped beside Evelyn's seat, swallowing hard before finally speaking. Her voice was low, forced into a polite tone she didn't truly feel. "Mrs. Harper," Sabrina began carefully, I wanted to sincerely apologize for earlier. It was never my intention to..." Evelyn didn't glance up immediately. Instead, she continued calmly flipping through her magazine, her demeanor utterly serene, almost indifferent to Sabrina's presence. Each quiet turn of the page felt like a dismissal, a silent assertion of authority Sabrina couldn't counter. The uncomfortable silence stretched, growing unbearable until Evelyn finally looked up, her eyes gentle but piercing. She observed Sabrina for a moment longer, allowing the flight attendant to squirm beneath her calm scrutiny. "Apologize," Evelyn repeated softly, arching a delicate eyebrow, a gentle challenge shimmering beneath her measured tone. "Whatever for, dear?" Sabrina blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She had expected immediate acceptance, an easy escape from this painful situation. Yet Evelyn wasn't offering her that escape. She was calmly forcing Sabrina to confront the truth. For not helping you when you asked." Sabrina stumbled through the words, her tone faltering as she struggled to maintain composure. "I was busy at the moment and..." Evelyn raised a gentle hand, silencing Sabrina mid-excuse. "Busy?" she echoed softly, her voice deceptively mild. Yet beneath its gentle surface lay a sharp, unyielding clarity. "Think carefully before you finish that sentence, Ms. Holloway." Sabrina froze, her pulse racing. The cabin fell eerily quiet, the conversations around them stopping as passengers leaned forward discreetly, eager to hear Evelyn's next words. Sabrina felt their stares intensify, humiliation creeping hotly up her neck. "You were never busy," Evelyn continued, her words quiet but unmistakably powerful. "You had ample time to cater to other passengers, to laugh at their jokes, to refill their drinks. No, dear, the truth is, you simply didn't consider me important enough." The words sliced through the tension, settling heavily into the air. Sabrina's cheeks flushed crimson, a heat rising sharply into her face. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out, because Evelyn's assessment was painfully true. Her excuses evaporated under Evelyn's calm, unrelenting gaze. Around them, passengers watched intently, the quiet murmurs of conversation now completely silenced. Olivia Harrington nudged her husband Richard, whispering softly, her eyes wide with awe at Evelyn's composed yet devastating rebuke. Before Sabrina could muster another weak defense, Lucas Bennett leaned forward from his seat, his voice clear and sharp, cutting through the oppressive silence like a blade. "It's funny, isn't it?" Lucas said, his tone laced with quiet disgust. Sabrina turned to face him, stunned at the interruption. "You're only sorry now because you realize who Mrs. Harper is, but what if she had just been anyone else? Someone without influence or wealth? You wouldn't have even bothered pretending to care." Lucas's words were calm, firm, and devastatingly precise. The passengers nearby murmured softly in agreement, several nodding slightly, their gazes now openly accusatory. Sabrina felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, humiliation burning hotly through her veins. I didn't mean it that way," Sabrina stammered, her confidence crumbling rapidly under the intensity of Lucas's gaze. Lucas shook his head slowly, disappointment flickering in his eyes. "Oh, you meant it exactly that way," he replied bluntly, his gaze unwavering. "You only care now because you realize who you disrespected. If Mrs. Harper had been anyone else, you'd have kept walking without a second thought." Sabrina's mouth opened and closed silently, no response forming. She had no counter-argument, no defense to offer. She stood completely exposed before a cabin full of passengers who had just witnessed her deepest flaw, her arrogance, her disregard, her dismissive judgment. She had carefully built her image as poised and professional, yet now all they saw was the truth beneath, the uncomfortable reality that Lucas had so ruthlessly laid bare. Evelyn regarded Sabrina quietly for another moment, then sighed softly, folding her hands gently in her lap. "Apologies given only because one fears punishment," Evelyn said evenly, "are hardly apologies at all." Sabrina felt a sharp stab of humiliation in her chest. Evelyn's words didn't carry anger or bitterness. They carried a quiet certainty that Sabrina would remember forever. "I suggest," Evelyn continued softly, her voice gentle but commanding the room's attention effortlessly, "you return to your duties now." Sabrina swallowed the painful lump in her throat, her vision blurred by tears of shame and anger she refused to let fall. Without another word, she turned sharply on her heel and walked quickly away from seat 7B, her pace brisk, desperate to escape the unbearable scrutiny of the cabin. She felt eyes follow her every step, each passenger's gaze a silent accusation, a judgment she had earned through her own arrogance. When she reached the galley, she leaned heavily against the counter, breathing raggedly, her confidence shattered completely. Back at seat 7B, Evelyn Harper quietly settled back into her seat, her calm demeanor unshaken. Lucas Bennett exhaled softly beside her, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. "I don't think she'll forget this anytime soon," he murmured, glancing at Evelyn with newfound respect. Evelyn smiled softly, a quiet certainty in her eyes. "She shouldn't," Evelyn murmured thoughtfully, her voice gentle yet strong. "Sometimes, the most valuable lessons are also the hardest to learn." Around them, passengers exchanged approving nods and quiet murmurs. Evelyn had spoken softly but decisively, revealing Sabrina's true character without harshness or cruelty, simply allowing the truth to speak clearly for itself. And as the plane soared on toward its destination, one thing was abundantly clear. Sabrina Holloway had misjudged Evelyn Harper terribly, and now she would face the full consequences of that mistake, consequences she had unwittingly but undeniably brought upon herself. As the plane touched down and glided smoothly along the runway, the soft hum of engines faded into silence, quickly replaced by the familiar rustling of passengers gathering their belongings. To anyone watching from afar, it seemed like an ordinary landing, just another routine flight reaching its destination. But inside the cabin, the air was thick with anticipation, tension simmering just beneath the surface. Sabrina Holloway sat stiffly in her jump seat near the galley, fingers clenched tightly around the fabric of her skirt, heart pounding with dread. The humiliating confrontation with Evelyn Harper and Lucas Bennett replayed endlessly in her mind, each moment sharper than the last. She glanced furtively toward the aircraft door, anxiety building within her as the plane slowly rolled toward the gate. Sabrina knew the reckoning she'd tried to avoid was now waiting just beyond that door, ready to sweep her entire career away in a single moment. Nearby, Evelyn Harper sat quietly composed, her eyes fixed calmly out the window, appearing as serene and unaffected as ever. Lucas Bennett, still seated next to her, subtly observed Sabrina's growing anxiety. Around them, passengers exchanged hushed whispers, discreetly pointing, realizing something unusual was unfolding. Olivia and Richard Harrington exchanged knowing glances, their eyes flickering sympathetically toward Evelyn, silently applauding the quiet dignity she'd maintained throughout. With a soft mechanical chime, the captain's voice echoed through the cabin, calm but authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. The local time is now 4:05 p.m. Please remain seated until we've arrived at the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. Thank you for flying with us today." But before the passengers could rise from their seats, the cabin door opened suddenly, revealing two uniformed security officers standing rigidly just outside. Sabrina felt her stomach drop sharply, her breathing turning shallow. They stood silently, their presence alone sending a wave of shocked whispers through the cabin. "What's happening?" one passenger murmured nervously. "Is something wrong?" another questioned anxiously. Passengers exchanged curious glances, quickly realizing the officers were not there for anyone but Sabrina. She rose slowly from her jump seat, her knees feeling weak, her breath shallow. Oliver Raines, the flight supervisor, stepped quietly beside her, his expression grave but detached. "You need to come with us, Miss Holloway," he said simply, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Sabrina hesitated briefly, desperation flickering across her features as the weight of every stair in the cabin pressed heavily upon her. She tried to maintain some sense of dignity, straightening her shoulders and forcing herself to walk forward. Yet with each step, her composure slipped further, her carefully crafted image crumbling piece by piece. She could feel the burning eyes of passengers watching, silently judging, witnessing her moment of defeat. As she passed Evelyn Harper in seat 7B, Sabrina involuntarily glanced down, meeting Evelyn's eyes briefly. Evelyn's gaze was calm and steady, no anger visible, only quiet understanding and undeniable strength. Sabrina quickly averted her eyes, but Evelyn's gentle voice stopped her cold. "I warned you," Evelyn murmured quietly, her voice carrying effortlessly through the still cabin. "People always reveal their true character when they think no one is watching." Sabrina's face flushed hot with humiliation, the words cutting deep. She didn't respond, couldn't respond, and instead forced herself to continue forward, each step heavier and more painful than the last. The security officers flanked her at the cabin door, their faces stern, impassive, their presence alone a silent judgment of her behavior. As she stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, the reality fully crashed down upon her. Sabrina had believed herself untouchable, protected by status, by charm, by her careful selection of who deserved her attention and who didn't. But now all of that had vanished, stripped away by her own arrogance. The security officers led her silently through the terminal toward a private conference room, their pace firm but calm. Sabrina's mind raced desperately, searching for a way out, for some justification that might save her. But she already knew there was none. She had made her choice, clearly, openly, and without remorse, and now she had to face the consequences. As she approached the conference room door, Sabrina froze momentarily, her heart nearly stopping. Standing inside, waiting with steely expressions, were Edward Whitmore, a senior executive of the airline, and Alexander Sinclair, the powerful businessman whose message had set all of this in motion. Sinclair's eyes were sharp, unyielding, silently condemning her without uttering a word. Sabrina entered the room hesitantly, her throat dry, her voice shaking slightly when she finally spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, Mr. Sinclair, I can explain." Edward Whitmore raised a hand sharply, cutting her off. His expression was hard, professional, utterly unforgiving. "We're well beyond explanations now, Miss Holloway," he said coldly, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of finality. "This isn't about apologies or explanations. It's about accountability." Sabrina's stomach dropped, her voice barely audible. "Please." "I didn't know who she was." Sinclair finally spoke, his deep voice firm and unwavering. "That's precisely the point, Miss Holloway. It shouldn't matter who she is. Every passenger deserves basic respect, something you failed to provide." Whitmore opened the file in front of him, his eyes cold and unsympathetic. "You are officially suspended, effective immediately, pending a full internal review. Your actions today have brought disgrace upon this airline. We will determine whether further disciplinary measures are required after a full investigation." Sabrina felt her knees weaken, her vision blurring with tears she fought desperately to keep from falling. "Suspended indefinitely?" she whispered, the reality finally sinking in. "Yes," Whitmore answered bluntly. "Indefinitely." Sabrina stood motionless, devastated and exposed. There was no place left for her arrogance, no opportunity for excuses, no chance of recovery from this judgment. The security officers stepped forward, silently indicating the conversation was over. As she was led quietly out of the room, Sabrina caught a final glimpse of Sinclair's face. Cold, resolute, completely unyielding. This wasn't just an unfortunate misunderstanding. It was a decisive punishment for a pattern of arrogance and entitlement she had allowed herself to indulge in for far too long. The officers escorted her through the terminal, past bustling passengers, past crews boarding their next flights, each step echoing painfully in her ears. Finally, as she stepped outside into the chilly evening air, Sabrina understood fully the depth of her mistake. She had spent her entire career believing she was above consequence, above responsibility, above respect itself. Yet, Evelyn Harper had silently shown her the truth. Real power didn't demand respect. It quietly commanded it. Sabrina had failed to recognize that simple truth, and now she would bear the full weight of the consequences. As the plane emptied and passengers filed quietly into the terminal, a sense of justice and quiet satisfaction filled the air. Evelyn Harper remained seated, her serene composure unchanged, quietly watching as passengers departed, some offering respectful nods and silent gestures of admiration. Evelyn didn't revel in Sabrina's public downfall. She hadn't asked for specific punishment or demanded consequences. The lesson, after all, had already been delivered clearly enough. Marcus Sheridan, the flight supervisor, approached Evelyn respectfully, clearly nervous but determined. He cleared his throat softly before addressing her, his tones sincere and humble. "Mrs. Harper," Marcus began carefully, his eyes lowered slightly in deference. "On behalf of the entire airline, I sincerely apologize for the incident today. We failed you." Evelyn turned toward him slowly, her expression gentle but resolute. She met Marcus's gaze steadily, her eyes reflecting quiet strength and thoughtful wisdom. "Thank you, Marcus," Evelyn said softly, her voice calm and measured. "However, it's not me you owe an apology. It's every passenger who has been made to feel small, disrespected, or unimportant. Every single person who steps onto our planes deserves respect, regardless of who they are." Marcus nodded solemnly, absorbing the weight of Evelyn's words. Absolutely. There will be a thorough investigation into this, I assure you. Things will change from today forward. Evelyn leaned back slightly, a small, thoughtful smile on her lips as she met Marcus's gaze. See that they do. This airline was built on trust, integrity, and basic human decency. If we lose sight of that, we lose everything. Marcus nodded firmly. Understood, Mrs. Harper. I will personally ensure this never happens again. Nearby, Rachel Dawson stood quietly watching, her fingers nervously gripping the edge of her uniform. Evelyn turned her gaze towards her, a gentle, knowing smile gracing her lips. Rachel, Evelyn called softly, gesturing for the young woman to step closer. Rachel hesitated slightly, startled to be addressed directly. She stepped forward carefully, her face flushed with embarrassment but eyes bright with quiet pride. You did well today, Evelyn said simply, her voice warm with sincere gratitude. Speaking truth to power isn't easy, especially when it might risk your own comfort or security, but it's necessary. Thank you. Rachel's eyes widened, her breath catching softly in her throat. She had always just done her job quietly, never expecting recognition. Evelyn's praise, so sincere and unexpected, filled her with pride and humility. Thank you, Mrs. Harper, Rachel murmured softly, visibly moved. I just couldn't stand by and watch someone be treated unfairly. I'm sorry it wasn't enough sooner. Evelyn shook her head gently. You spoke up when it mattered most, Rachel. Your courage didn't go unnoticed. Trust me when I say that. Alexander Sinclair, quietly observing from a distance, stepped forward slightly. Mrs. Harper, he interjected respectfully, with your permission, I'd like to personally ensure Miss Dawson is recognized. I believe we need people like her at the forefront of this airline, reminding all employees about our core values. Evelyn nodded gently, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. I agree. Rachel's actions today showed true integrity. This airline could use more leaders like her. Rachel's cheeks flushed pink with surprise and pride, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. Sinclair nodded solemnly, clearly pleased with the outcome. Consider it done, he confirmed. Back outside the airport terminal, Sabrina Holloway stepped shakily onto the sidewalk, her career in ruins behind her. The evening air was sharp, cutting through her false bravado, stripping away every last shred of self-delusion. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, shivering, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming sense of humiliation she felt deep within. She replayed every moment in her mind, the arrogance, the dismissiveness, the humiliation she'd inflicted so casually. Each memory stabbed sharply, forcing her to confront the painful truth she'd avoided for so long. She had built her entire identity on superficiality and status, mistakenly believing she held power over others, that she was superior because of her uniform, her title, and her charm. But real power, real strength, she now painfully realized, wasn't rooted in arrogance or status. It came from kindness, compassion, and basic human respect. A car pulled up beside her, engine idling softly. Sabrina glanced at the driver, who nodded respectfully, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Everything she thought she knew was collapsing inward. Inside, Evelyn Harper calmly finished her conversation with Marcus and Alexander, quietly confident that meaningful change was underway. She knew better than to demand vengeance, understanding that consequences must serve not merely as punishment, but as lessons. Lessons about humility, about character, about the responsibility that came with power and privilege. Remember, Evelyn said softly to Marcus, her voice gentle but firm, respect is the foundation of everything we do. Without it, we are nothing. Marcus nodded deeply, clearly moved. I promise you, Mrs. Harper, we will not forget. Evelyn smiled warmly, satisfied. Good. She gracefully gathered her belongings, standing elegantly to disembark, her dignity untouched by Sabrina's disdain, her composure unshaken by the day's events. And as she walked gracefully down the jet bridge into the terminal, passengers stepped aside respectfully, some whispering softly, recognizing not merely who she was, but what she stood for. Back inside the airline's private conference room, Edward Whitmore and Alexander Sinclair finalized their plans. Whitmore took careful notes, outlining directives for immediate training reforms and a full internal audit of all crew conduct. Sabrina's actions had exposed flaws hidden within the airline's corporate culture, and now it was clear that those flaws would no longer be tolerated. As Rachel Dawson stepped from the plane, her heart swelling with newfound purpose, she felt not just pride but a profound sense of responsibility. She had been seen, acknowledged, elevated, and now she knew exactly who she wanted to be. Not merely an employee, but a symbol, an embodiment of dignity and fairness for all passengers, no matter who they were. The airport terminal bustled with movement, life continuing as always. Evelyn moved gracefully through the crowd, her presence quietly commanding respect without demanding it. She paused for just a moment, glancing back at the aircraft behind her, a subtle smile playing softly on her lips. She hadn't come on this flight seeking trouble or demanding special treatment, but when she saw injustice, she hadn't hesitated to quietly ensure it was corrected, swiftly and decisively. Her quiet strength had set a precedent, leaving behind a message clearer than any corporate policy ever could. Respect is not merely a courtesy, it is a fundamental right. Stepping out into the fading sunlight, Evelyn took a slow, gentle breath, satisfied not by Sabrina's downfall, but by the meaningful change already underway. Change driven not by anger or vengeance, but by clarity, dignity, and courage. Behind her, the airport terminal bustled with life, people coming and going, oblivious to the quiet transformation unfolding within the airline. Evelyn Harper walked away knowing she had accomplished something important, not just for herself, but for every passenger who would ever step onto one of her planes again. It was a moment she would remember, one she hoped would remind others of a simple, powerful truth. Real authority, real dignity, and real respect must be earned through kindness and integrity, never by arrogance or entitlement. And that, Evelyn Harper believed, was worth everything. As we reach the conclusion of this powerful story, take a deep breath and consider for a moment the profound lessons it carries within. This wasn't just another incident on a flight, nor was it merely about a proud flight attendant facing the consequences of her arrogance. Rather, this was a powerful lesson about humanity itself, about the fundamental values that bind us all together, no matter our backgrounds, roles, or status. It's a story of respect, dignity, and equality, values that must remain unshaken at the heart of who we are, both as individuals and as a society. Respect is not a luxury, nor is it something to be selectively given only to those we perceive as worthy or powerful. It is, and always should be, the very foundation upon which we build all human interactions. It's the baseline expectation that each of us deserves from one another, simply by virtue of our shared humanity. No amount of wealth, power, beauty, or influence grants anyone the right to disregard or disrespect another person. Yet too often, society conditions us to believe that respect can be measured or quantified, that it's something we can grant or withhold based on superficial measures like appearance, age, status, or perceived importance. Today's story starkly reminds us how profoundly misguided this notion is. In the narrative you've just experienced, Sabrina Holloway believed herself entitled to act with superiority. She judged others not by their intrinsic worth as human beings, but solely by external markers of status. She assumed that the elderly woman, Evelyn Harper, was not worth her time or her courtesy, simply because she appeared humble and unassuming. Sabrina's arrogance led her to dismiss Evelyn without a second thought, treating her as though she didn't matter. not realizing she was disrespecting the very person who built and represented the values of the airline she worked for. And ultimately, Sabrina's arrogance became her own undoing. The lesson here is crystal clear. Appearances can deceive us, and it's a dangerous mistake to underestimate anyone. Each person you encounter in life, no matter how insignificant they may seem to you at first glance, has value, strength, and potential far beyond what you may perceive in a brief, superficial moment. But there is an even deeper truth here, a message we must not overlook. Respect and dignity are not owed simply because someone holds power, wealth, or influence. Rather, respect is owed simply because we are all humans, complex, unique individuals who carry within us experiences, hopes, dreams, and vulnerabilities that deserve recognition and understanding. Respect is about seeing others not just as they appear, but for the genuine humanity within them. Think carefully about your own life, about the countless interactions you have every single day. Think about the moments when you, too, may have unconsciously made quick judgments about people based on how they look, what they wear, where they come from, or what they do for a living. Maybe you've dismissed a stranger, underestimated a coworker, or overlooked the value of someone whose story you never took the time to learn. Maybe you've done this without even realizing it, influenced by subtle biases ingrained by society or by careless habits of thought. This story is an invitation for you, for all of us, to pause, reflect, and truly reconsider how we view and treat one another. It challenges each of us to question our assumptions, to challenge our biases, and to consciously choose kindness, compassion, and understanding in every interaction we have. It's a reminder that the world we live in today desperately needs more empathy, more respect, more genuine equality. Change begins when each of us commits to seeing others not through superficial labels, but through eyes of empathy and compassion. Change starts the moment we recognize that every human being, rich or poor, young or old, powerful or powerless, deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness. It starts the moment we decide to use our voice, no matter how small or uncertain, to stand up against injustice, arrogance, and disrespect, wherever we may encounter it. We may often wonder if a single voice, a single act of kindness or courage can truly make a difference. But history teaches us something profoundly reassuring. The greatest changes in society often begin with small acts of courage and compassion, performed quietly by ordinary people who refuse to tolerate injustice. Look back at the story. Rachel Dawson was just one junior flight attendant among many. Yet when faced with Sabrina's mistreatment of Evelyn, she chose not to remain silent. Rachel spoke up, not because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do. Her bravery, her willingness to speak truth in an uncomfortable situation, was noticed, celebrated, and eventually rewarded. She became a symbol of integrity and courage within the airline, a powerful reminder to us all that choosing respect and fairness is always the right decision, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. The message here is empowering. It's a reminder that you too can make a difference. Every time you choose kindness over judgment, every time you stand up against unfairness or inequality, you are setting in motion ripples of positive change far greater than you may ever realize. Never underestimate your power. The power of your voice, your actions, your decisions, to shape a better world. Today, as you step away from this story and back into your everyday life, carry this lesson with you. Commit yourself to practicing genuine respect, sincere compassion, and mindful empathy toward every individual you meet, no matter who they appear to be on the surface. When you feel tempted to judge quickly, pause and remind yourself, that person you underestimate today could very well be someone who changes your life tomorrow. We are all connected. Our lives intersect in surprising, profound ways. Each interaction we have offers us a chance, a precious opportunity, to uplift rather than demean, to inspire rather than discourage, and to recognize the humanity we all share beneath surface differences. Imagine a world in which each person chooses kindness and respect every single day. Imagine communities built on the principle that every individual matters, deserves dignity, and must be treated with genuine respect. Imagine the kind of world we could create together if we each embraced this simple but powerful truth. Now, as you reflect on Evelyn Harper's quiet dignity, Sabrina's painful lesson, and Rachel's brave voice, think deeply about your own place in this story. Who will you choose to be? Will you be someone who silently judges, or someone who courageously defends dignity and respect for all? Will you dismiss others casually, or will you reach out with empathy and compassion? Your choices matter far more than you might imagine. Let this moment, this story, become more than just entertainment. Let it become a genuine turning point, a catalyst for growth and change in your own life. Take this opportunity to reaffirm your commitment to kindness, to equality, to respect, and to the basic human dignity that each of us deserves. The world doesn't change overnight, and no single person can transform society alone, but never underestimate the profound power of small actions and quiet courage. Change, true, lasting, meaningful change, always begins with one voice, one heart, one action at a time. Today, let that voice be yours. Choose empathy over judgment. Choose respect over arrogance. Choose kindness over indifference. Embrace the belief that dignity and equality are not privileges to be earned, but fundamental rights we owe to each other. Stand up against injustice. Speak out against arrogance. Treat every individual you encounter as someone worthy of respect, because they are. This is how we create a better world, one small, compassionate step at a time. As you close this chapter, remember clearly the powerful lesson you've witnessed today. Respect is essential, equality is non-negotiable, and human dignity is sacred. These values should guide our lives, shape our choices, and define how we see one another. Never again underestimate anyone, because every single person you meet has the potential to surprise, inspire, and teach you something deeply valuable about life and about yourself. Let today be the day you commit fully to these ideals of kindness, empathy, and respect. Let this be your new beginning, your renewed promise to treat everyone around you with dignity and grace, just as you would hope they treat you. For it is only when each of us truly understands and embodies this truth, that every person deserves respect, that we can finally build the kind of world we all wish to live in. Thank you for taking this journey and reflecting on its message. Now, carry these words forward with you and choose every day to be the person who changes the world, one respectful, compassionate interaction at a time.